Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Adolfo Carrillo Cabello. I'm at the University of Minnesota, and I'm sitting in for our regular host, Shannon, who is one of our presenters today. Before we get started, there are a few things that I like to mention. I'd first like to start by acknowledging our organization, IALLT. That is the International Association for Language Learning and Technology. And we have a series of webinars. We normally have one webinar a month. Everyone is welcome to attend, and these webinars are recorded, and the recordings are a members-only benefit. So we highly encourage you to join and become a member of IALT. As part of the membership, you also get access to the foreign language teaching magazine, and also to the listserv. So please consider becoming a member of IALT. During the webinar, we ask that you keep your microphone muted so that we avoid any background noise for our presenters. Also, if there is time in the presentation, we will let you we will let you know when you can unmute your microphone, but otherwise just keep yourself muted. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, you can type them in the chat. I will be monitoring the questions and will convey those to the presenters at the end. To type a chat, just click on the chat box on the lower menu on the screen and type your questions. If you have any problems, you can reach out to me during the session via the chat or to Evan Rubin, who is also a co-host for this webinar. If you want to exit full screen, you can just simply hit the escape key on your keyboard. I also like to mention our next webinar that will take place January 26, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we have the webinar on the topic of best practices for collaboration between support staff and faculty. And we have two presenters, Carly Lesowski and Erica De Sosa for Wayne State University and Michigan Virtual Reality School. I'll put the information in the chat. Our webinar today is on H5P. And our presenters are Shannon Spasova from Michigan State, Jessica Miller for the University of Wisconsin, and Jeff Magoto from the University of Oregon. And their topic is H5P and ANVILL, looking forward to 2020. I'll pass it on now to our presenters.
Thanks so much for hosting, Adolfo. I'm just going to start quickly, and then we're going to go in the order of Jessica, Shannon, and Jeff. As Adolfo said, if you have questions that come up, type them in the chat. We'll try to help each other answer questions along the way. If there's anything really pressing, then you can interrupt us, but we thought to save time, we would put them at the end. So I just wanted to say really quickly, what are H5P and ANVILL in case you didn't know. You might know, you probably know, but just in case you don't know, we're going to be talking about these two things. And so what is H5P? It's an application that you can use to create interactive activities, and these can be embedded into websites and course management systems. You can sign up for a free account at h5p.org. H5p.com is related but different, and that's the website you would use to get it going through your course management system through your university. Or you can get it going, you can use H5P in ANVILL, which is a platform that you can use to house various types of activities, like voice boards and H5P activities. This is through the University of Oregon, and Jeff Mikado has put so much work into this, and we really appreciate it. So you can actually house your H5P things in ANVILL if that works best for you. And so it's a free account at anvil.uoregon.edu, and we'll talk more about those in a little bit more detail. And I just wanted to say quickly that if you're interested in H5P, it's really exciting that the H5P conference will be in the United States for the first time in Madison, Wisconsin, organized by IALT's own Lauren Rosen. So if you're interested in this, please do consider coming in May. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. I'm going to stop sharing, and then Jessica will share. can't hear you, Jessica.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we do.
Okay. All right, so a little bit about myself. I started using H5P last January. I actually learned about it through Lauren at one of her workshops. And because our university was switching from D12 to Canvas, I thought that was a good time for me to learn a new tool since I was gonna change things anyway. Also, just to contextualize, I teach 12 credits a semester and also have responsibilities like advising and research committees. So everything I'm saying, what I always make my choices based on my limited schedule resources. So just so you know, if I'm able to do this with my load, it's because it's pretty easy. So I really had to weigh the pros and the cons of using H5P before starting investing my time in this. And this is also the goal of my presentation, is for to help people who may be hesitating or considering H5P make an informed decision. So you obviously don't want to use technology for the sake of using technology. But if you feel that it would significantly improve your courses and the students' learning experience, then go for it. So the pros is that H5P has a free version that you can use. It's pretty easy to use and it has unique content. So for me, that was a big draw. Things that Canvas couldn't do, H5P could. The cons are that the free version does not tie scores into the Canvas gradebook, is that it can be time consuming depending on how much you want to use H5P. And while the content is unique, it's also pretty overwhelming. And this is a good representation of how I felt. I felt I was both characters at once. There's just so many different content types, which can be really exciting and really overwhelming. So my first piece of advice is to pick one content type that fills an important need. And for that, you're going to need to create content. And I feel that one big advantage that I saw in H5P is that students don't need to create an account. And it works to some extent to integrate H5P activities into Canvas, though that doesn't always work as planned. But I went ahead and started creating some content. And I asked myself, what do my students need? And first and foremost, I thought that they needed more balance between writing and speaking practice at home. And that's something that I could achieve through H5P. One of my favorite activities is Speak the Words. And I think Shannon is going to be talking about this in more detail. So I like it because students rarely speak outside of class, though it's important for them to practice speaking as much as writing. And so I created some activities where I could recycle vocabulary, or I could reinforce some grammar rules with speaking. So it's basically voice recognition. Unfortunately, I found out that speaking activities do not integrate into Canvas. So here's a screenshot of a few examples. So I always start with the important note that students have to use a Chrome browser. And then they can, so I put a link and they open it in Chrome, and then they can do the speaking activity. So the second part here is the prompt. So students are told they need to conjugate in the correct tense. and then they do. And if they say the correct answer, there's a little star that appears there that tells them that the computer recognized the word. Another question that I ask myself is what can be done at home and what can be done in class? And that's also, so that's also how I choose my content type. So I like to do what is often referred to as a flipped classroom, where students learn about concepts at home and then they come to class and they practice the language. And the interactive video content type allows me to do that. So I create some videos. They're narrated PowerPoints. I don't know if you're familiar with that feature, but basically you create slides and then you create a recording, and then that turns the PowerPoint presentation into a little movie. And I try to limit my PowerPoints, my narrated PowerPoints to maybe 3 minutes, and then I upload that into YouTube, and I can create an interactive video with H5P. And it looks like this. There's the video, it looks like a YouTube video, but then every so often there's a little button that appears and students can answer questions. So in this case, this was a pronunciation tutorial, and we were working on elision. So whether you keep or you drop an E. And so in this example, students had to pick. I just to show you what it looks like with wrong answers, I just inputted some random answers, but this is what it looks like in the video, and then students get immediate feedback. And I also used to do a dictation type of activity. And this is me crying because lately, like maybe 3 weeks ago, they stopped accepting my audio files. I was recording with my phone and the voice memo. It was so easy, and it's not working anymore. And this was me, literally an actual photo of me. Like and then I tried to contact tech support, and then people tried to help, and it still doesn't work. So that's something that I'm gonna address in my practical advice for you. But first, another thing that I like about H5P is the opportunity to share. So you can share your content with everybody, with colleagues, with people outside of your institution. For example, you can share samples on your professional site, or if you use Canvas, for example, you can share your Canvas content, and then everything will just carry over. So I always joke that my YouTube channel is going viral with 67 subscribers, but I do pronunciation tutorials, and then I share the H5P link in the description of the video so that other people can direct their students using that link too. And just to show you an example of how it looks when it is embedded into Canvas, this example is just a fill-in-the-blank activity that I did. And so this is what students see, and then this is what they see when they give their answers. And then they can opt to show solution or to retry. And I just think it looks pretty nice, and then they don't need to go outside of Canvas for the most part. So practical advice is, for me, something important would be to use your LMS tools first. So whatever you use, get to know the tools that are available. It's just easier to troubleshoot if you have problems with your university's technical support. But obviously, like I said, Canvas doesn't do everything. Like, I really like the speak the words activities, so I decided to go with H5P for that. Second is establish the need for H5P. So don't do it just for the sake of using a new gadget. And then I learned this the hard way, but limit H5P to 1 or 2 types of content. Or you can work with a student helper for more, which is what I did this summer. I had a student who had used H5P in one of my classes last spring, create some content for another class, and then she had a similar experience than me, is that at first it's a little bit overwhelming, but then once you figure it out, especially if you just work with 1 or 2 types of activities, you figure out how you like them, you set them up, and then you can clone those activities and just input new words or new verbs to conjugate, and then it really speeds things up and it becomes pretty easy. So know your content type, create one good model, and then clone it. And that has worked really well for me. In the end, you'll save a lot of time. And do not assign H5P for grades if you use the free version. It is possible. I know that some people can ask their students to take a screenshot of the score, but I personally, I don't think I would have time to then record everything manually in the grade books. I just stay away from that altogether. But I make sure that students understand that they need the practice, whether it's tied to a grade or not, if they want to improve. I always use the analogy of doing a sport or music, how you just have to practice a little bit every day to make sure that in the end you can perform. And so I find that students do the activities. So in the end, I found that for me, there are more pros than cons, and that's why I decided to keep using H5P despite some limitations that I addressed. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. It's great to hear from you, and I really appreciate both you and Jeff joining me on this presentation. I'm going to share, and okay, so you can see my screen. Okay, so Jessica had some great advice, and I agree with her about picking one content type to start out with. But then what happened to me is I really, really liked that one content type. And then I ended up wanting to use a whole bunch more. And so what I'm going to do, first, I'm going to tell you that we do have a couple of tutorials that we made for the 2 content types that I think may be the most useful for you. I think I agree with Jessica, the interactive video, and also Jeff said something about this. Interactive video is probably the most useful for language teachers. We have one out there on YouTube called Getting Started with H5P Interactive Video, and then there's another one, course presentation, that we also have. So these are the content types that I use the most, but I wanted to today show you some content types that I've started using more recently or that are maybe newer, so that if you really get into H5P, you can decide whether you want to expand your 1 or 2 content types to more. And I feel like once you learn interactive video well, then you can figure out all the rest quite easily. A lot of people think that the learning curve is high on H5P, and it may be slightly higher than some other similar applications, but it's not that much higher. And if you kind of push through and learn interactive video, then the rest of the interface is very similar. And so I think once you know that one, you can easily expand your palette of what you're using. So I wanted to show you a few of the kind of less well-known ones. One I've been using recently a lot is advanced fill-in-the-blanks. And one of the things, several of the things that I like a lot about this is that it gives you automatic and immediate feedback if that's what you want. And then it also has the ability to give hints. It has the ability to set it so that you can warn about spelling errors. You can put an image or video or a table. And if you want to, instead of having them type in fill in the blanks, you can have them choose from a drop-down menu, which can be really cool in some instances. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So here, when I get it right, it tells me immediately. So that if I was going to make the same mistake a million times, then it would catch it immediately. Here, I'm going to make a little mistake. It'll warn me that I've made just off by one letter mistake, that I can immediately fix it. And then if I make more than that, then it will show me that it's wrong. I can set this in different ways. So I can set it how I want to. It doesn't have to come up immediately if you don't want it to, but I think that's really, really useful. I also like that it gives you the ability to have a little hint here. So I have some little hints that they can click on if there's something that they don't remember, for example. You can also, in most H5P activity types, give a lot of really targeted feedback if you want to. So that if there's a common wrong answer for a particular question, you can easily give some feedback that'll help students figure out what's wrong with their answer. As Jessica said, I also think speak the words and speak the words set is really valuable. As she said, you can only use it in Chrome for now. And sometimes if you try to put it into an LMS, it will block it because of pulling from a different website, so just be aware of that. But it uses automatic speech recognition. It can help students identify pronunciation or grammar problems. And I like how you can use this. There's a button called Show Solution that shows some feedback. And of course, it's best for self-check because it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And I think you have to tell your students that it's not perfect. But so here I have an example where they have to practice a poem. So here I have the poem. I'm going to say this one right. Молчи, скрывайся и таи. So it showed me that I got my answer right. And then the next one I'm going to say not quite right. И чувства, и мечта свои. Oh, it thought I was right. So sometimes it's a little overly forgiving. Let's see if I can say this one wrong enough. Пуской в душевной глубине. Oh, it's being way too forgiving of me today. But the one thing I wanted to show you, I'll have to say the next one really wrong. Вставают и заходят оня. Okay, so here it shows me that I was not quite right on this. And the thing I like about this is that I can click this Show Solution, and it shows me what it thinks I said. It's not perfect, but that could help your students identify some kind of pronunciation or grammar issue. So this speak the words or speak the words set, I think can be really useful in conjunction with other types of activities. Jessica already mentioned dictation, so I won't go into too much detail about that, but I like that you can, if you want to, you can provide a slower version of the audio file. It has the ability to give partial credit. So if right here I have one spelling mistake, one small mistake, and it gives half credit, and you can do some customization of how you want it to react to those kinds of spelling mistakes. And also I really like that you can limit the number of times students listen to it. I suppose they could get around it perhaps by refreshing the page, but it still might be useful. This is an interesting activity type. It's called essay. I'm not sure that this is the best name for the activity type, but what it is it's a kind of open-ended answer box. And what you do as the instructor or as the designer of the materials is you provide keywords that it's looking for. So you can see here that I have an example, summarize what you learned about St. Petersburg in the text. Who founded the city, when it was founded, and several of the main sites in the city. Include at least 3 sites. If you didn't get full points, check to make sure you included these. And so I'm gonna go here, and I'm actually gonna look at the edit. Well, maybe I'll just quickly, so I know Peter the, oops, I'm typing in Russian here. Peter the Great, and then I'm gonna say 1703 well, maybe I'll say 1705, makes it not quite right, and see what it comes up with. One of the things I like about this is that it doesn't, if your students kind of slightly word the sentences differently, what it's doing is looking for the keywords. Obviously, that's also not perfect for every type of activity, but for certain types of things it can be useful. So here, yes, the city was founded by Peter the Great. Here it shows me that I didn't get this quite right, and it's asking me using some feedback that I've given here. You got one important site in St. Petersburg, but I needed to say 3. And so I just wanted to look in the back end of this one really quickly to show you how it looks. I had to, so here's our Peter the Great, and then I had to put in some different variations for that. And then here I have several variations of the sites that could have been put in here. And then if I check here, you can see what some of the different choices are. And here's the feedback if I put the keyword in as the student, or if the keyword's missing, what feedback the student would get. So I think that can be really, really useful for certain types of activities, obviously not every type. I also wanted to show you a couple of kind of new and a little more complicated activity types that you may or may not want to get into, but there's one new one that I'm really interested in, and I've only just started trying it, is branching scenario. And this is actually a screenshot of the back end. And the one I've been working on so far is not very complicated. All I have is, this is the branch. In theory, you could have your students go on a different branch depending on what they chose or how they performed on the question. Here, all it does is it sort of spits them back. Let me see if I can show you what it looks like. So this is what the branching scenario looks like. I get to a question, and if I answer it wrong, then it sort of spits me back and I have to do it again. That's the most complicated I've gotten so far on this. But if you got really creative, and I'm hoping I'll have time to do it in the near future, you could have a student go down a completely different path depending on what they answer for one of those questions. So it's a really interesting kind of new way of thinking about an activity. You know, we always wanted to do those choose your own adventure books in different ways. So again, this is kind of a more complex activity type, and I've just gotten started with it. So if others have done more, we would be really interested to hear what you've done with it. I also wanted to show you quickly the interactive book, which we're having a webinar in March coming up on Pressbooks, and which is a way to make open educational resources. The new activity type from H5P called interactive book is another way of maybe making some kind of online textbook. It's somewhat similar to something like Pressbooks. I believe it's still in alpha, and so that might be a consideration if you want to wait until it gets into a slightly later form of development. But you can see here, here's my example of what I've tried so far. Again, this is one that I haven't done much with, but here you can, on the left, you can have different chapters, and then you can have students skip ahead, and then it allows you to incorporate a whole bunch of different activity types here. So here I have a video, and then a little multiple choice question, and then another video. And I think you can incorporate a whole bunch of the different activity types from H5P into this interactive book. So if you're interested in doing something like that and your campus doesn't have a subscription to Pressbooks, for example, this might be a thing to consider. And then just one more quickly, they've recently come out with a really easy way to make word searches. And there are many, many more activity types from H5P that I really enjoy. Personality quiz is kind of a fun one. Image hotspots is another one that's really great. And there are a whole bunch of interesting ones with images, like where you can put images in the correct order, maybe according to a story or something like that. So these are the ones I wanted to highlight today, but there are so many different activity types, and so it would be great to see what other people are doing with all of these activity types in H5P. And related to that, just one last point that I want to say, and Lauren reminded me of this. There's a group of us who are interested in H5P who are trying to decide how to create an H5P repository where people could post their H5P activities and then share with other people. Because like Jessica said, it's easy to share them, and it's easy to share them in a way that other people can kind of download and edit them and make them their own. So we are working on this, and we don't know exactly how this might shape up in the future. But if you're interested in that and helping us with that, we would love to hear from you. So I'm going to put my email address into the chat after I get done with my section of the presentation. And I'd be happy to hear from anybody who would be willing to or interested in participating in this, this drive to hopefully someday create an H5P repository. We have kind of a pilot version in Russian that's not quite ready to announce to the world, but almost ready. And so keep your eye out for that if you're interested in Russian. And we're hoping that maybe we'll be able to expand that. So I'm going to stop sharing and then hand it off to Jeff. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Mikado at the University of Oregon, and I'm going to talk about using ANVILL or using H5P with ANVILL. And I put my lesson for today, if you want to play along with me, in the chat. Let me do that here again. It'll give you a sense of what it takes to sign on with an ANVILL account and so on. You'll need to do that. But I think, as both Jessica and Shannon said, I think the best way to get started with H5P is to look at a lot of examples of what others have done or are doing. And the sooner we can get this archive up, I think the quicker those of us who are enthusiastic about it will soon have other people to add to the collective wisdom. Get started with a little bit of history. So this is H5P. This is a content type called Agamotto, which, unless you like to do a lot of things with chronology, probably doesn't have a whole lot of application in language teaching. But I thought, just to show something simple, using Jessica's words, in terms of getting started, it's one of the easiest content types to get started with, because all you do is paste in a bunch of images, assign a label to it, and you can have your instant history of ANVILL, for example. And I would say ANVILL's history, like any long-term open source project, has had many tortured paths, some very productive, some not very productive. But the one that we've sort of stuck with over the years is this sort of voice board tool or portfolio tool, sort of two angles of asynchronous speech. You know, nowadays it's probably most well known by tools like Flipgrid. But you know, we've been doing it for quite a while, and over the years, you know, we've had tens of thousands of people use that tool. But like any tool, you know, they soon start to outlive their usefulness, or people want to do more with the tool. And about 5 years ago, it became also increasingly clear that if we're going to do, if this, you know, if ANVILL itself is going to survive, it's got to play well in the world of LMSs. So we had taken steps down that path before. It ran in Blackboard for many years on our campus, but that wasn't something that we could share with the world. So everything we build, we try to build it first for ourselves, and then if it makes sense locally, we try to, you know, put it out to the world. So ANVILL is basically an implementation of a speech management tool that, you know, that was developed at the University of Oregon. And 5 years ago, when the university switched to Canvas, we thought it was a great time to really push the our own enthusiasm for LTI, you know, this ability to run applications inside of a learning management system. And rather quickly, we got it working and presented it to the LMS administrators, and they were partially enthusiastic, but not the registrar. So before someone tells you, oh, is it, so the beauty of LTI is it'll work inside of your course management system. The con is that getting course management system administrators or registrars to allow you to do so can be another different story. So I can say that 4 years later, it's now there, and or at least it's there in a year of piloting, and we just concluded our first term of that. But for those of you who are worried, can H5P be compatible with your course management system? There are a couple of really good solutions. What Jessica showed was basically creating the content type and then getting that embed code and placing it in your course management system. What Lauren referenced in the chat was the H5P.com, where you can, you know, your institution can subscribe to H5P's commercial version, and it will run just fine in all the major LMSs. And so ANVILL is sort of a third solution or idea where because we use open source materials to build ANVILL, and we've taken it upon ourselves to be the LTI host for Drupal, we're able to, both on the technical side and hopefully on the political side going forward, be strong advocates for people who want to, you know, run an LTI version of ANVILL in whatever course management system they happen to have. Let me back up a little bit. So the last couple of years, we paid a lot of attention to that sort of core tool of VoiceBoard, you know, doing some small technical changes like, you know, making the video bigger and a lot more smoother, and beginning to have H5P run inside of ANVILL. And, you know, kudos to the H5P team, because from the get-go, they made it possible for any of us who have, you know, any kind of open source project, you know, running on WordPress, running on Drupal, running on Moodle, to incorporate our work inside those systems. And, you know, that's just been, you know, a major gift. So when we were beginning to think about the latest version of ANVILL, it was really with sort of 4 or 5 things in mind. ANVILL's never been particularly pretty, so this time we hired a real designer to do our user interface. Over the years, we discovered that, you know, just a VoiceBoard task or just an H5P task in separation wasn't as powerful for content-based teaching, or even, as Lauren mentioned, for flipped learning kind of teaching, as it could be if, you know, the H5P content types or the ANVILL voice boards could be integrated into a page or a lesson. As I mentioned, you know, H5P was at the top of our list in terms of making it both more present, but also maybe easier for users to use. I've talked about LTI compatibility, and the last two, you know, one of our big discoveries in the past year was that with the right talented developer, and this is a shout out to Norman Kerr, who's joining us on this chat, you can build something that looks like Kaltura or looks like something like Panopto for if your boss gives you 3 months off and access to an Amazon Web Services environment. But, you know, one of the big challenges in any of these tools for language is how do you deal with all the media that we as teachers generate? You heard Jessica talk about how, you know, her, you know, suddenly no longer had access to her speak the words files. So we want to make that AV component of both voice boards and all the H5P content types just a no-brainer. So whether you're doing an interactive video or something that you as a less commonly taught language teacher, where you're the primary source of material, we want to make that part easy to do and easy to stream. And of course, the last part is a mobile tool. And while we'd hoped to be able to announce it this January, right now we're putting off until March. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've done in the last year. So there is that overwhelming set of H5P content types. From a design point of view, we've played with lots of options, but right now it still sort of seems to serve most users best if we just present them all at once. Ideally, we would move to something more along the lines of a wizard, but we haven't gotten there yet. But as everyone has said previously, start with one, whether that's a voice board, whether that's an interactive video, or just uploading a YouTube video or a Vimeo video. These are the core building blocks of your lesson. We worked on the voice board tool so that it could be far richer, much more like social media, modern social media. So here's just a simple example of a student from Finland, talking about her hometown and being able to easily share what it looks like. And sharing can be of any type, audio, video, text, what have you. Here's the H5P content type course presentation with a drag the words example. So we wanted to fully support all that the H5P team gives us, but the sort of addition for us is that we can, because we have this streaming media engine, we can place that audio content type right inside that task, so that rather than just sort of a traditional close, it becomes sort of a spoken close. And again, this is something the teacher can record herself, or if she's got the recording, she can upload it. I started by showing you that page from, this is a page from my call class for grad students where we were exploring H5P and what makes sense in terms of content types and sequencing and so on. This is the column content type in H5P that allows you to include different sort of tasks or activities. So if you wanted to reference, if students are learning the IPA, these are linguistic students, by the way, you can put a reference like you can embed a web page from Wikipedia inside, so that if they're still working on, what those sounds sound like, they have something to reference from it. And lastly, sort of on the more fun side, this was a lesson set that we helped an ESL teacher build recently. She was working with Ken Burns' recent documentary and gathered up mostly open source material, thanks to the good folks at PBS, to teach her students a little bit about country music. But my point here is that, on the left, you have an H5P content type. Actually, you have a couple. On the right, you have a voice board task. What instructors, I think, are increasingly doing in their course management systems in terms of using modules that really are very intentionally designed. We want to make sure that that's every bit as present in ANVILL. So, to just show that a little bit more detail, and I'm running short on time, here's that actual lesson. Put that in the, and you may not have time right now, but if you want to check on it later, this lesson is open and shared to everyone. So working with that first line from Frost's, famous poem, students are asked to read in what it says. So, here they can put in some text. They can link to a YouTube video if they put it there. They can upload a sound file from their phone, or they can use the inline recorder or switch to audio and begin recording. Whose woods these are, I think I know. I can play that back. You're not going to hear it. Trust me, it sounds fantastic. And there's my message. So, we think that speech, should be present everywhere that makes sense. And so, this ability to sort of mix, a sort of readiness activity with a more, kind of decoding sort of activity. Here's some variations on that same theme. Again, using the audio file there. Apologies, you don't get to hear this great reading of the Frost poem. And maybe concluding with something, far more open-ended and more content-based, where they, actually watch a video of someone who chose to interpret the poem in a wonderful way and grab a screenshot and post it somewhere else. So all of these are kinds of ways of taking, what's there thanks to H5P and recrafting it in ways that make sense to language teachers. So there's my embedded APA chart. Here's an example of what Shannon just showed us. For me, poetry, especially poetry like Frost, makes a lot of sense for tweets. So students get 256 characters to describe what the poem's about. If you're interested in seeing how these lessons are developed, I put up a little screencast here, so you can watch that and see how that gets going. And lastly, if you'd like to have a pretty basic how-to of getting started with either voice boards or interactive video content type, those are the two that are sort of my go-tos when I teach people how to use H5P, because those are two things that are hard to do in class. If you're a believer in flipped learning and really trying to optimize preparation for the harder things that you want to do in class, that these are things that students can do on their own, and or at least seem to be very willing to do on their own. And I think with that, I'll stop sharing. And maybe we can tackle some of the questions. I see one from Jessica right now. Oh, go ahead, Adolfo.
Thank you. I'm going to interrupt you. I have grouped the questions so to make it a little easier for you to address. And I think it makes sense to start with questions directed to the last part of the presentation, specifically to you. You generated a lot of questions as you were along demonstrating and also some requests. Some have already been answered, but I just wanted to give you a chance to elaborate a little more if you have anything to add. The first question we have is whether or not you can mix H5P with core ANVILL activity types in one way or another. And the short answer was yes, but do you have anything to add?
So the great thing about H5P is some of the content types are designed for integration. So if you use the column type or the course presentation type, these are meant to sort of package different kinds of activities. So that Frost poem was actually a course presentation inside of a column. A little bit advanced, but, and then the ANVILL content types, basically we only have three. Our tool for uploading or embedding YouTube or Vimeo videos, the voice board / portfolio tool, and our media tool, which let me display that PDF in my handout. Those can be wrapped around any H5. So the lesson building tool lets you mix and match ANVILL tools. I forgot, oh, sorry. We have an ordering device or an ordering tool for any of these lesson pages, so you can move them around and resequence to your heart's delight. Hope that answers it.
Okay, great. And just two related questions. One is asking whether or not there are tutorials that you could share for Anvil to share with the group. And just a related question, if similar to what was addressed with H5P, related to whether or not the instructor can grade the students' work in Anvil specifically.
So the answer is yes. The caveat about the homework or the assignment not going directly to your, say, your Canvas or Moodle gradebook is still true. We have our own lesson record store. If I can share again real quickly. Lost my window. And others feel free to jump in while I'm babbling.
Well, while you're doing that, another question, since you're going to be sharing your screen again, and maybe you can show a little bit or just answer directly related to the closed listening slide. If the audio Draf, if the audio is available in ANVIL, or can it be done in H5P?
So that ability to include the audio here, and maybe Shannon can answer this. To my knowledge, H5P can't do this. This is us using our, we sort of supersede the H5P audio tool in order to do this. But
and so is the audio visible to everyone in the class, to other students, or is it to just the instructor?
So in the thing I'm showing right now, this is visible to everyone. This is a task that everyone can do. For the voice board tool, as the instructor, you can set it to either be public or private. So right now, this one's set to be private. So students only see their own postings. Instructor sees them all. If you toggle it off, then it becomes a more common forum and everybody sees everything. So that's how we handle public and private there. Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. And then this, of course, is just bringing a wiki page right into ANVIL. So the sound here is coming from Wiki, not from us. And this is just our embedded media tool.
There's actually a question related to the use of different media types in ANVIL. One of the questions is related to licensing, whether or not the materials you're integrating are open access or Creative Commons license. How does the copyright work in ANVIL?
So the copyright works in ANVIL the same way it works everywhere else. If you're embedding someone else's YouTube video, like which is what's happening here, no problem. If you're doing what my colleague's doing, I don't have the access. Oh, yes, I do. With what's going on in this lesson, I didn't ask questions. She brought the content. We helped her put it together, which, is, I mean, it's a matter that we take quite seriously. She assured us that everything she was doing was linking to sites on the PBS website. Language center directors, we often take the cop-out that we're not lawyers, but if I see something that's, not appropriate, I certainly, shout it out. On the other hand, embedding a web page like this from Wikipedia is completely fine. This is strictly, thanks to the APIs that, Wikipedia and others make available. This is how we can share information.
Okay, I'll move us on to two broader questions that have come up in the chat. One is related to what have been some reactions that the students have had with the different activities. So we'll start with Jessica if you have anything to add to that, and then we'll move on to Shannon. And a related question after you talk about what are some of the reactions, if you could briefly mention how you deal with grades, if at all, for the activities that you integrate, since that's a common theme with other questions, whether or not you take into account the participation or what you do with the activities in terms of grades.
So,
sorry, I forgot. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So a student reaction, let's say they have not complained, so I take that as a good sign. Everything works smoothly. The only comments I really had were about the speak the words activities, because sometimes, no matter how hard students try, the voice recognition feature keeps marking them wrong. And one student said that, because I always provide a recording of myself so that they have a model, and the student said, I even played your recording, and H5P said it was wrong, and they were very frustrated. And they had assumed that they would be graded on it. So even though I tell them, I think that they get a score, and that they think that it's tied to a grade. And so I had to reiterate that it's just for practice and that it's not perfect. I think Shannon had mentioned that, yeah, you need to tell students it's not perfect, it's just for practice. And so I tell students, just do your best, and if it's wrong, you keep trying and it's wrong, move on, but let me know, and then we can work on it in class. And I think when students know that, then it works out. So I've never tied H5P to grades, just because, like I said, it's a little bit complicated logistically for me to do so. So I don't really have experience with that. I don't know if Shannon has experience with that.
So I can tell you what I've been doing, which is not ideal, and so I may be switching over to ANVILL soon. But what I've done so far is I have embedded the H5P into a quiz within the LMS. So the students do the H5P sort of to learn it and get self-checked, and then they have the real score that they get below. I don't love that, but it was what I came up with at the time. I would rather have it just where they can just do the H5P by itself. As far as student feedback, my students have been using this for quite a while. So again, they're kind of used to it and don't even notice it. And I feel like the non-complaining is the, like Jessica said, is good for me. But they did, however, when I started using the advanced fill-in-the-blanks recently that had the answers show immediately, they really liked that. And they give me that feedback that was really useful for them. I also asked them specifically about the speak the words, and they all said that they thought that was very useful because they could get some feedback on their pronunciation without stress. I mean, it's not a person, and so it's not perfect, as we've said, and we have to sort of explain that to them, but it gives them some feedback without feeling the stress of having a person hear you make mistakes.
Okay, that's great. We're almost out of time, but another just umbrella topic that came up in the chat was related to the integration of H5P or ANVILL with the LMS, and there was lots of great information on this topic. But if you can summarize in 1 minute, which is what we have, what would be some pointers that you would have to help or navigate this?
Well, I think the best one is do LTI right, and then whatever you're doing in LTI will be able to be passed to the gradebook in your LMS. but we haven't done it quite right. Right now, we can give you a lot of data about who did what, how much time they spent on what activities, but that data does not yet get passed to the LMS. But hopefully, in maybe late summer, we will get there on that. The technical ability to do so is now there.
Okay, excellent. And we are out of time, but we will follow up. Just a few reminders. Lauren is reminding us of the H5P conference coming up in Madison in May. And I also want to remind everyone of our upcoming webinar in January 16. I put the information on the chat. I hope you can join us again. And good luck finishing up the semester. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks for hosting,
so much for hosting, Adolfo. You did a fantastic job. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Jeff and Jessica for joining me. And I hope that the people who are interested in H5P will contact us, because we really do want to continue our work in this area. Right, Jeff?
We do. Especially the archive, or the, I don't know, whatever we're going to call it, but it's, I mean, I thought Jessica put it well at the beginning, that she really tries to calculate how much time she's got to expend in terms of what the return on the investment is going to be. And the more complicated the lesson, the instructional set, the more it'd be nice if there were some ideas and templates to grab from.
Contact us, everyone, and come back to our webinar in January, February, March, etc. Have great holidays. Have great end of your semester. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.